Hi, welcome to Aperture. So I want you guys to pull up this graphic first of all. This is our little, you'll see F1, F1.4, F2, F2.8, you get the gist of it. I want you to pull up that graphic. An f-stop is how much light the camera sensor is receiving. So if you notice, the lower numbers, see f-stop is written as, or aperture, as like an F with a dash in it. It's backwards on here, but you have the PDF in front of you. So you can kind of print this out, you can take notes on it, do whatever you want to help, whatever helps you remember what aperture is. So if you think about it, like this is the little leaf, like stack of leaves that are on top of the sensor that open to a certain degree and close within a fraction of a second, but that has to do with shutter speed, and we'll get into that after this. So this also controls the depth of field, which the wider the aperture, the more shallow the depth of field. So if you see it being wider here, the point of focus, it says depth of field, but it's really like depth of focus. So if you're to take a portrait of me and you are in 1.4, aperture 1.4, f-stop 1.4, it's the same thing, you would probably only be able to get, if I was posed like this, you'd probably only get this eye in focus. If it was like f-stop 2.8, you could get both eyes focused. It just like increases the amount of focus around your subject and what it is that you're shooting. If you're shooting people, you want to make sure their eyes are always in focus, because that's the first thing that as human beings we look at when it comes to another person. So controls the depth of focus. The smaller the number in this scenario, the larger the aperture is, like this. The larger the aperture is, the more light that's coming in. So it kind of looks like an iris, right? So for example, if you are in like a dark room, what do your pupils do? They get really big because they're trying to search for light, right? It's the same thing with aperture. And of course, if it's really bright outside, I don't know if you've ever, you've driven in your car, or maybe you're on the subway and you go through a bright light and you're either doing a FaceTime with someone you care about, or you're just like looking to make sure your makeup's okay or whatever, you look presentable. Have you ever noticed when you are out in bright sunlight that your pupils, they don't dilate, they do the opposite of dilating. They're very, very tiny. It's the same thing because your eyes are adjusting to the light. We are daytime creatures, so we don't see very well at night. So then our pupils dilate. Anyway, I've driven that. I've kind of beat the horse with that one. I hope you understand that perspective of it. But it's also, if you think about it, I mean, you can't really see that far in front of you when your pupils are fully dilated, can you? If you go to the eye doctor and they do that, they give you the eye drops to make your pupils dilate so they can see inside your eye, you can't see and you're really sensitive to light. You can't even drive home because you can't see the road in front of you. Think of aperture and f-stop just the same way. It's just like our eyes. All right, so you're probably wondering why you would want a shallow depth of field. Now, I constantly, if you've seen my work, I love shooting at a shallow depth of field because I am so obsessed with extreme fall-offs. Since I shoot boudoir, the majority of my clientele are over the age of 35, 32 sometimes, and they don't want to see all of their fine lines, any blemishes. It helps with that in camera. If you are dialed in to, I always camp out you're gonna hear me say that a lot. I camp out, and I know what I like, and this is where I stay. I camp out at Aperture 2.8, and the reason for that is so that my eyes can stay in focus. I can still see the body line. I can see what my person is doing. It's not too drastic of a fall off, but I'm still getting like really soft edges. I'm getting really soft lines. It also helps kind of eliminate contrast. Now that, and also shooting at a low aperture or f-stop also helps with detailed shots. So if I'm photographing, maybe a girl's wearing pearls, and it's a very low light setting, and I just want to catch the detail in her décolletage, then I would use a shallower depth of field, because I want to enhance and focus on this one detail about her body. Or maybe I just want to capture a detail on something that she's wearing. Lace is really cool to photograph and find details, because you can see a little bit of it, but then the rest of it falls away. It's really cool. And I have an exercise planned for you. But first, let's talk about lens choice. So your camera probably came with a zoom lens. Let me grab mine really quick. It's probably like the standard lens. This came with my very first camera that I got in college, and I still have it. It's an 18-55, and it zooms. Now, this lens doesn't go as far or as low as a depth of field as a prime lens, for example. Let me just take this off here so you can see what I'm talking about. Prime lenses don't zoom. They stay in place. And I love shooting these, because I love shooting at a 2.8 or below. If I am photographing like a wide shot beyond this is my 50 millimeter, by the way. It doesn't go past that. The highest f-stop I can get, the lowest f-stop I can get would be about 1.4, depending upon, and other lenses will go lower than that. You'll have like 1.2, 1.4, 1.8. Honestly, can't really tell the difference. If you're asking me, it's all a matter of opinion. But if you want to save like $400 on a prime lens, that will definitely make a difference. Anyway, so if I wanted to shoot what I shoot, where I camp out in 2.8, I couldn't go to 2.8 on this, because if I zoom in, it's going to change the aperture in the camera to accommodate the lens, which seems really silly. There are some cameras that will hold the aperture when you zoom in or out, but I really love the look of a prime lens, because I feel like there's a better fall off. The lowest this gets is 3.5, and that's just not shallow enough for me. So yeah, if I'm doing like a wide shot of a girl on her back, it's usually in front of this sheet right here. It comes up all white when it's done when it's all said and done. And I want to capture her body. I make sure that I am far enough away to where I can see her from the top of her fingers, because usually she's like this, top of her fingers to the end of her toes, and it will be in focus. And then I can crop later on in editing, but that's a whole other ball game. But I want to make sure I capture all the details of that. I could still do that in 2.8, which I do a lot of the time, but I also am very much a lover of the light, and I want everything to look cohesive, so I'll stay within a certain range of lighting. Making sure my lighting is cohesive is really important to me. So I hope that should explain everything. The f-stops. It's not like you click it and you're at an f-stop. To stop down, you have to hit 3 clicks. in the aperture. It's the same thing with the shutter speed in order to tell a difference in the lighting. Not so much the depth of field is that drastic. It's something that you don't really see it. Like you can see it on the back of your camera, but you don't really get to see it until you see the image on your computer screen. And you're like, okay, I can see where the fall off is here. Anyway, yeah, that's the difference between prime and zoom lenses. And then I did want to touch on aperture priority. This is how I learned photography, was through aperture priority, because understanding exposure mainly, because I knew I wanted to have a shallow depth of field, so I wanted to stay in 2.8. And every camera has this, so it's actually the A on the dial, or maybe it's a setting that says aperture priority. What that does is it allows you to control only the aperture. So then the camera does the shutter speed coordinating to the aperture that you selected. So let's see, for example, also my ISO is usually camped out at about, I stay between, depending upon how sunny it is, because sometimes the sun in here gets really bright, I stay between 100 and about 400 ISO, just because I don't want to like blow out anything and cause my highlights to be blown out, which we can get into later. But if I am, let me get my camera going here. Let's see, I am in 100, let's go to 200, it's getting kind of dark out. So if I am in 200 ISO and I am in aperture priority, oh, my lens cap is already off. You can see, okay, so this is a Nikon camera. It's similar to Canon with the setups and everything. Let me turn on my light here. You can see it says 2.8, that's where I like to stay. But it'll compensate, my shutter speed is right here. It'll compensate shutter speed for me. So if I click, see how it changes with my aperture? You know, that might be a really low shutter speed. That's how you figure out how everything works, is just by playing. So, aperture priority, play with it as much as you can. If your image is too dark, well, how are you going to supplement that? You can decrease your shutter speed, which we'll talk about in the next video. You could up your ISO. So, but first, before we jump into the next video, I want to give you an assignment to do. So, assignment, I guess this is our first assignment. You are going to photograph 3 objects. You're going to line them up, one behind the other, and using aperture priority, you're going to have 3 images. The first image will be just this guy in focus. The second image will be both of these guys in focus. And then the third image will be, it doesn't have to be these objects, all 3 of them in focus, just so that you can see the different types of how focal range works. And depth of field, depth of focus is the same thing. Tomato, tomato. All right. And then also share it in the Facebook group, because I'd love to see your progress. If you have any questions, feel free to also send me them there as well. So I'll catch you in the next video.